necessarily work in hazardous areas. So we'll go through this and we'll talk about a few things. What is a hazardous area? Some legislation behind it. The competence requirements, where Peter can absolutely jump in and give lots of good information about him and CompEx and the likes. What it means for you guys in terms of your business, qualifications and accreditations, again, Peter's area here. And we'll sum it up, and if there's any questions that we can answer at the end, we'll happily take them. Just a bit of a caveat on this. We've got, as I say, about an hour to do this. This isn't a training course. Please don't think that you're going to go away from here and know everything there is to know about hazardous and explosive environments. You absolutely won't. This is just a heads up and just a touch. And Peter and CompEx can cover off just how in depth those training courses are. They are really, really thorough when it comes to a proper high quality CompEx course. So this is just a light touch to give you some information about hazardous areas that you might not always have come across before. So light touch. So first of all, I suppose the easy question is, what is a hazardous area? What do we mean by that? Well, a little bit of history going back. So in 1988, there was a horrible disaster in the North Sea, Piper Alpha. And the cause of this was a faulty pressure valve on a piece of equipment, and there was a large explosion. That explosion led to a fire, and that spread across the whole platform, and it destroyed it. The platform was originally designed for oil extraction, but had been modified over the years to also extract gas. So the whole basis of the construction of it was designed to prevent the spread of fire, not to consider explosions. So when they were removing gas and there was an explosion problem, it got incredibly worse, and well, everything went wrong. The fire spread, more explosions spread, and tragically 165 men on board lost their life, as well as 2 rescue workers who were out there trying to save people's lives also died with debris falling from it. But that's not the only issue we've had. If you remember the Buncefield oil depot in 2005, Avonmouth explosion, there was the BP oil issue a few years ago. There's masses of problems in history, and there's some good magazines. Peter probably gets copies of Hazard X, where there's always issues throughout the world with explosions in these sort of areas. Now, not everybody works on an oil rig. I appreciate that, but there's so many areas where hazardous areas and explosive areas take place that you can have a problem. So it's always wrong to assume hazardous areas are only for oil or gas rigs, or some people think they're only related to petrol stations. They're not. Hazardous areas can be found all over the electrical contracting world. So from a contractor's point of view, you need to be aware of when you're stepping into a potentially hazardous and explosive environment. So we talk about hazardous areas where you've got things such as flammable liquids, gases, vapors, and dust. And wherever you've got these things that can explode, where you've got a certain right mixture, so it's not too much, it's not too little, and you've got a spark and fire triangle, as you guys probably all know about. If you've got these, then you're likely to be in a hazardous area. Peter, I've got a little quote on the screen there from IEC 60079. What is that?
Yeah, definition of a hazardous area.
Yeah, and the standard itself.
Yeah, the IEC 679 is a suite of standards which are to do with hazardous area environments. The main ones that contractors probably would want to be aware of and use are probably the Part 10, which is really area classification. Part 14 is defining installation requirements, so a new build, a bit like initial verification. And Part 17 is the maintenance, so a little bit like periodic inspection. So yeah, as contractors, you're looking at Part 10, area classification, Part 14 for installation and build, and Part 17 for maintenance. So yeah, it's a suite of standards. We tend to adopt the IEC within the British standards. So what you'll find at the moment, there's a process going on whereby 14 has been rewritten as an international standard, and we're trying to now adopt it as a British standard, which has proven a little bit of a challenge. because their terminology is somewhat different.
Yeah, you're right. It's a bit tricky. So I suppose what we're saying here is the hazardous area requirements and standards are in addition to 7671. They're a bolt on. It's 7671 is one tool in the toolbox, and it doesn't really cover off hazardous areas much itself, does it? No. So sorry, yeah, go on, Peter.
No, I was just going to add. Sorry, I missed out that key point there, really, Gary, which you picked up there. Really, is the 6179 sits under BS 7671, so it's really a development of that and deals specifically with hazardous areas. But yeah, that's a good clarification there.
So hazardous areas, yeah, oil rigs, fuel forecourts, filling stations, but there's more than that. You might work in chemical or processing plant. You might work in water treatment industry. You might work in food handling, processing. You might just walk into a factory where you're asked, okay, you're going to work in this area and there's some lights to put up. You're going to work in that area, there's some lights to put up. And then all of a sudden you're going to be asked to go work in a spray booth, or you're going to work in a solvent store. Those sections can be classed as a hazardous or explosive environment area. So you might not have a site that is an entire hazardous area if you were working up at, say, chemical works. You might be working just any old building that has something within it that is explosive, and it could even be things like flour. So if you're working in those environments, you might be stepping into a hazardous area. So there's a lot of places where contractors will walk into these environments without actually knowing it. So why is it important? Well, unlike other locations, by the very nature, a hazardous area presents a real possibility of explosion, fire, injury and death in many cases. So therefore, it's absolutely imperative to know where the boundaries stand, and when you're walking into those environments, where your insurance stops, where your competence stops, what equipment you can take, what tools you can use, what products you can use. And even the smallest things can have a massive, massive issue and a massive problem. And I mentioned this tragedy a short while ago. 11th of December, Buncefield Oil Depot in Hertfordshire, and Peter knows this well. A vapour cloud of unusually high strength exploded at 6:01 a.m. and the resultant fire overwhelmed 20 large storage tanks, and a major emergency was declared 7 minutes later. And the sound of the explosion was heard 125 miles away, and it registered 2.4 on the Richter scale. Earthquake size tremors. Unbelievably, nobody was killed immediately with this, but there was £1 billion of damages caused. Homes nearby had their windows smashed in. And this all happened because one tiny little level gauge on a petrol tank failed. One tiny little component, that big. And it didn't register it was full, and it just kept churning, then gas came out and it exploded. And if you want to know what £1 billion worth of damage looks like, it's kind of like that. And that is only a few years ago now, 20 years ago, that happened, but still nobody died. It was absolutely miraculous. But you don't have to be working in those environments to step into a hazardous area. As we say, flour and solvent areas can also present hazardous areas. Now, Peter, there's masses of legislation around hazardous areas that CompEx deal with quite a lot. Yeah. I mean, for a lot of our members, they're aware of things like the electricity at work regs, but these ones, the DZIA regs, what do you guys? Well, how do you guys come across these?
Yeah, I think we tend to explain it probably looking at the European level, look at the ATEX directive, and we've got a directive, ATEX directive to do with equipment, and then we've got equipment to do with the procedural side of things, but they're embodied in the UK legislation under DCEA, the Dangerous Substances and Explosive Atmospheres Regulations, and they make a requirement for judgment to be taken in terms of installations that is going to be able to manage the risk associated with the presence of a hazardous, or potentially the presence of a hazardous atmosphere of some description. And then we also, of course, in the UK have the Health and Safety Executive who act to enforce that legislation as well. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that we work with, probably under the CompEx flag, really tends to be DCEA, but we're an international provider of qualifications as well. Yeah. So we also look at the IEC standards, the ones that you alluded to earlier on, the IEC 679 suite of awards as well. And that'll have an implication in terms of supervision levels, which will be of use to ECA contractors, which I'll mention later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it 137 and 114, the ATEX European Directives?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So those ones are
those different aspects.
Yeah, they're the workplace and the equipment, but as you say, it's combined up into DESIA in the UK. In terms of DESIA, it's a piece of legislation that requires employers to, and these are not suggestions, these are a must, aren't they? Requires employers to find out what dangerous substances are in their workplace and put control measures in place and all these things that you see on the screen. And it places a legal requirement on employers to ensure the above is done as a minimum, isn't it? That obviously an employer can always do a wee bit more in that sense, can't they? So for all of this, an employer, a client, a building owner, a duty holder has to give a contractor all the information they need in order to work safely in a building that may or may not have hazardous areas. We'll come on to the risk assessments a wee bit later. But also DESIA refers to area classifications, and it's for contractors working with 7671 where you have zones in bathrooms, then they're fairly easy, or swimming pools, they're nice and simple, they're fixed in terms of where the body of water sits. It's a bit more difficult classifying the zones in a hazardous area, isn't it, Peter? Because things move, things change here.
Yeah, I think there's two main approaches to it. I think the diagram you've got there, which shows part of a petrol filling station, we tend to have standard models to follow for petrol filling stations. And there's also an Energy Institute publication, the I-15, which uses standard models as well. But yeah, you can also get, I think you mentioned there, about the movement of the hazardous area. You mentioned, you're looking at the diagram there, you've got a fuel tanker. So there'll be a transit zone with that as well. So that will carry a zone around with it. So wherever it parks up, there's going to be a zone around that vehicle. So yeah, it's quite a complicated science, and there's lots of different ways of approaching it. But I'd say you're pretty much making a very clear representation in your slide there.
And it's difficult as well with gases, because as we know, some gases are light, some gases are heavy. So some gases will naturally sink into pits, some gases will naturally dissipate. But when you've got an installation such as this on the screen, you've got to put the right equipment in, or a contractor has to put the right equipment in for those zones, same as they would do in a swimming pool. There's no point in putting something that is classified for a zone 2 in a zone 1 area, because it won't be safe. So if you don't know what those zones are to begin with, how can you go about selecting the right equipment? Now, I've got some images here that we've borrowed from a online wholesaler, just to give an example. So if you're going out and putting some equipment in a hazardous area and you think, well, I'll just stick a gland in, it'll be fine. All right, the prices might be a wee bit high, but I've gone off the online prices here. Generic 75mm BW gland, the online price was 75. It was 50 quid here. So I'm working in a hazardous area. I might need to put a gland in. I might need to put a box in. I'll just put this one in. Brilliant, no bother. Actually, what you could be using is a proper hazardous area gland. This one is a particular brand called Hawk, 75mm ATEX rated one, rated for petrol, gas and dust. And the importance of knowing these zones and the importance of getting the right equipment. We've talked about explosions, we've talked about injury. It's also making sure that you and the client do it right for the job and for your business. Because if you've got 10 of these glands going in and you pick the wrong one and you've got to go back and replace them, well, one of them's a bit more expensive than the other, to the tune of 500 quid. So getting the right equipment and getting the right products in there is absolutely essential. And that starts at the very beginning in terms of the design, the risk assessment, and building up and making sure that you've got the right equipment in the right areas and the right zones installed by the right people, which is absolutely vital. Now, Peter, we talk about competence. DESIA requires employers to do much to make sure that the sites are safe and sites are all in the right order and the right information is given. So normally employers ensure they get the right skilled people in. So
Yeah.
this means getting people who are suitably skilled, trained, and competent in terms of hazardous area. Obviously, CompEx, you guys do all sorts in terms of hazardous area. How do you help people become competent?
Yeah, I think hazardous areas in many ways mirror conventional electrical installations in so much as you've got to have people that are competent to do the work. How you measure the competence is somewhat different. So if you imagine in the electrical industry, we tend to look at the ITES requirement where someone's got the 18th edition, should I say, 18th edition, test inspection, and they've got an MVQ3 to sort of define a base level of competence. In hazardous areas, we have a scheme which looks at there's a suite of qualifications that define competence against different types of installation arrangements, gases, vapors, dusts, and so on. So yeah, we look at using these qualifications really as a way of defining those.
And you mentioned the IEC standards, the 60079 series, and it's impossible for somebody who's never done any training to understand what they are. I mean, you can see on the screen there just how many different parts there are, and that isn't all of them by any stretch of the imagination. So one method of proving competence is referring to you guys, isn't it?
Yeah, and we have a suite of awards that kind of tie in with that range of IEC standards, and I'll perhaps talk about that. Well, I'll do that now, actually. The diagram there that you've got is it's quite complicated. There's the list of qualifications, or main list of qualifications that we offer. We also do some various online training. There's free online training off a website. If you go into our website and have a look and engage with us, you've also got other things that we provide, things like our toolbox guide, which is a number of you will probably be aware of that if you've had any hazardous area involvement. That's an EMUA publication. You'll have one. There you go.
Yeah. See, I've got mine ready.
And I've also got to say we have that on our toolbox guide. Well, we have an app which is actually the CompEx toolbox app. So if you go into that, I mean, these retail, I think Claire will be able to confirm. I think about £28, something like that.
Yeah, I think £25 or something. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So you can buy one of them, which is kind of hazardous area proof because you can take it on site and there's no likelihood of an explosion from that. Or you can download our app on the phone, and you've got that exact same publication available free, and it's called the CompEx app. But looking at the suite of qualifications there, might be worth you spend a couple of minutes just on those, Gary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't want to go through them individually, but what I'll probably say is that for an apprentice, for example, and people do train apprentices in terms of CompEx training, you'll see we've got two qualifications there, the foundation, which is a theory qualification, and we've got Foundation Plus, which is a practical qualification. But thereafter, the central group of qualifications, our main one that most people will do is the EX-01-204. And that is a little bit like the Swiss Army knife of our qualifications. If you've got a member of you guys are competent installers, but also business people. So when you look at a qualification, you've got to say, which is the one that's going to be useful to my business? And one of the factors, and it's a business decision, as you'll know, the size of your company will dictate the sort of portfolio of training that you'll want to use. And a good starting point, if you've got less than five employees, you don't really know what level of engagement you're going to apply in CompEx qualifications, what sort of work you're going to be doing. The 1 to 4 is a great suite because that covers the installation and the maintenance of work in gas and vapor environments. And what I'll also tell you about our qualifications is they tend to be split into two individual groups. They are install and then maintain. So if you look at the let's take the 5 to 6. That's a dust environment qualification. The 5 is the install, the 6 is the maintain. And they tend to follow that format. But as I say, the Swiss Army knife of qualifications will probably be the 1 to 4 if you have less than 5 employees and don't really know how you're going to break into the hazardous area market. If you've got more staff and you want to differentiate the roles and abilities, you might want to add in something more specialised. So if you're doing work in water utilities, now that is an interesting area to get into now because, as we know, the water sector is under pressure from the government to make sure that they meet environmental targets, and therefore there's installation work going on. So there's opportunities there, but they have particular challenges in that work. We've also got a qualification for fuel forecourts. There's 8,000 fuel forecourts in the UK. I'm not going to say it's an easy sector to break into, because many of these are tied up in larger scale contracts and things like that, you know, where people pick up groups of garages and whatever. But every garage requires every year a DSEA report to be completed. And amongst that DSEA report, there's going to be electrical testing and there's going to be hazardous area inspection. So there's a suite of qualifications, and I'm not going to go through the rest, Gary, because I probably covered the main headlines there. But I would say, you know, think about what you want to do. If you're a business, you might want to do the 1 to 4 initially, and then pick up more specialised stuff thereafter.
I think one thing that you said there, Peter, used the word opportunity, and I think you're right. This isn't to be seen as a barrier. This is to be seen as an opportunity to get into a different area of work, and that's something that we learned during COVID is when people have all the eggs in one basket. If that basket is suddenly took away from them, it becomes a huge problem for that business. Whereas if you can diversify and specialize, and this is specialist work, it usually means you can charge more at the end of the day.
I think building on that point you made there, I think everything about hazardous area work is more expensive. I mean, if I take this sort of junction box here, now that is, if you see it clearly, I'm probably in the wrong place. Now that is probably, imagine a junction box in electrical installation, you're looking at £2. £2 to £5 maybe. That thing is, they're looking at £80 there. The insurance requirements, that's another thing. Everything is more expensive, but also the remuneration from the client is better. So it's one of those where you've got to invest and appreciate the costs are quite high, but the payments also follow that level of money as well.
Yeah, as you say, it is very specialist work. You mentioned something as well a wee bit earlier about the EAS in terms of competence and qualifications, and this is just something for members to be aware of. The EAS puts a requirement on all businesses to ensure that there's adequate supervision and people are suitably competent. If you've had a recent inspection from Searcher or NICIC, then you'll probably have seen that they'll be asking about this. So they're asking for you to demonstrate how all employed persons are either competent in the work or suitably supervised for that work, and flagging it up. And they also put out this little quick, easy way of defining competence. It is a bit vague and it is a little bit simplistic, but it's not a bad start. And you pick a level of operative, 1, 2, or 3. You pick a degree of risk of the work, 1, 2, or 3. And if you've got a low-level operative doing high-level risk work, then they need a bit more supervision, which if you're looking at, say, hazardous areas, it's always going to be high level of risk. So you're going to have good quality operatives, hopefully, working in a high risk area, but they're going to need a certain amount of good supervision. Searcher are asking for evidence of that now on assessments. So they're asking for evidence of how you manage your staff and how you supervise them and what degree of competence you've got. And we've got a nice tool to help with that. It's called eCOMs. It's if you're an ECA member, it's absolutely free. Get in touch with your regional manager. They can give you a demo on it, and it allows you to put all your operatives in, shows who does what level of supervision you've got, and what sort of work they can and should be doing. And if they're doing it wrong, it'll flag it up and give you some nice coloured warnings on there. So if you are interested, go on eca.co.uk and look up eCOMs. It's there. You can put all your certificates. So if you do a CompEx 1 to 4, you can save your certificates in there and it'll show up. We mentioned Peter used to work for NICIC in the past, and NICIC have got a scheme for hazardous areas. You used to do the assessments for that, didn't you, Peter?
Yeah, it's an excellent scheme. I'd say so because I worked for them, but I would say really enjoyable. Some great contractors. A lot of them were actually ECA contractors because of the size of the company and things like that. A lot of them are attached to the ECA scheme. But yeah, the fundamental difference about that, and also you mentioned the supervision, Gary, was when you look at the electrical industry, levels of supervision can be sort of, I'm making up the number, but you might have one qualified supervisor and 10 staff. But with the hazardous area supervision model, what the IEC 679 says is that you must have either the qualification or you must have direct supervision. So you really have got very, very much higher supervision rates, as your matrix showed in the previous slide.
Absolutely. And if you are applying for, say, the NICIC Hazardous Area Scheme, you would need a CompEx qualification in order to go through that. That'll be recognised on your ECA technical certificate. So this firm here, Gary Parker Electrical Limited, sounds a bit rough, but
he can professional.
Absolutely, he can do electrical installations in commercial and industrial buildings, but also hazardous areas, because it's been recognised by the NICIC Hazardous Area Scheme. So there's ways that you as a business can reach out to CompEx and get training and get qualifications, reach out to Search or NIC, have an assessment on that based on those training and qualifications, and then display this. And this is all great for your client. It shows that you're doing the right thing, and then it gives the client confidence. So all that aside, what does it mean for you? Well, in terms of electrical contractors and ECA, our members work all over the place. We don't just work in simple dwellings. All days are different, and some days you might step into a hazardous area without even knowing it, and you might have a client who asks you to do some work in a hazardous area without even knowing it. And the advent of electric vehicles now requires electrical installations to be done on places where we would typically try and avoid electrical installations. This is a picture of a common sight we're seeing now on fuel forecourt stations. We've got a hugely powerful EV charger being placed on a fuel forecourt station. But it's not just filling stations, it's also some other things that we see on filling stations in terms of not just EVs. These sort of things are cropping up on fuel forecourts quite often. And again, we talked about earlier the right equipment and knowing the zones. Well, do you know you're in the hazardous area zone there? Have you had a classification? Are you okay walking about the fuel forecourt, carrying your phone, carrying a tool, doing any sort of installation work? Is it the right work that you're doing? Can you dig safely? All this sort of stuff needs to be considered when working in those environments. And of course, for your business, you've got to consider the risk and the impact that it has. So if you're working in or around a hazardous area and you think you've got a hazardous area, you should always ask for an existing hazardous area risk assessment. That is the starting point. Somebody who's suitably trained with DESIR recognition for undertaking that risk assessment should be able to give you those classification zones. If you don't have those, don't work in it. Just keep away from it, because you don't know what you don't know in that sense. Do you have the right skills? Do you have the right competence for doing this? Well, if you're not spoken to our friends at CompEx, possibly not. Go and speak to them, get those skills, get those competencies, get those training courses. Have you got the right tools and equipment? Well, if you don't know the zones, you don't know what tools and equipment you can and can't use. So if you can't answer yes to all of those questions, stop. Just stop work. Check your insurance, check your competence, because you don't want to cause yourself any problems. You don't want to cause your business any problems. ECA have got a nice guidance note that we can share out with you. It's on the ECA website. If you go to ECA, go into member services and technical, there's a guidance note, a simple ECA guidance note for yourself to show you what we're talking about today, but also a nice simple one to hand out to your clients as well if they're not sure what to do, because a lot of clients aren't necessarily skilled when it comes to this sort of stuff, so they don't know what they've not got. So your business, well, you can legitimately operate in hazardous areas, but you need to know what you're doing. The risk is huge if it goes wrong, not just fire and explosion, but just financial risk for you and your organization. This isn't just true of duty holders and businesses, but it's also true of employees and employers as well. People shouldn't be working in those environments if they don't know what to do properly. Make sure you've got the right people, make sure you've got the right skills, and at the end of the day, CompEx are very friendly. If you phone them up and have a chat, they can point you in the right direction. Their website is dead easy to use. You can find a course, you can find a training provider near you, and you can get in touch with them. And at the end of the day, the human beings, they're nice and friendly. There's nothing to be scared of with them, apart from the courses are pretty tough. So do make sure that if you are reaching out to them, give them the right amount of respect for the training course. If you turn up on a Monday and you haven't done your homework, it's going to be a tough gig, isn't it?
We do have pre-learning, Gary. So
You do, don't
the
you?
idea, yeah, we try and get people ramped up to the level whereby they can actually perform well on the course if we can. Yeah.
Actually, on that, Pete, that's a good point. What sort of pre-learning do you offer? Because these are really intense courses, aren't they?
Yeah, we've got online training. Quite often, it's when people register for the course, then it's tied in with the registration of the course that then people are introduced to an online training platform. Also, the same platform can be used subsequently for CPD. As you know, ECA and IC and so on, they require CPD periodically as well, certainly on the annual inspection. So yeah, it can be used in that way as well. But we've also got several publications, and I said the toolbox guide. All those things can be helpful as well.
I was chatting to one of your colleagues, Peter. Forgive me, I can't remember who it was. And sorry, this might be a stat you don't have to hand. They're talking about the pass rate of people who don't do any pre-learning and those who do pre-learning. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's a really obvious curve, isn't it? The difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's quite a significant difference. You can actually see that someone's done pre-learning, they do the qualification, we measure that, and we compare that against people who haven't. We wouldn't deliberately have groups where people aren't doing it, but we can see if people are engaging and go on to the pre-learning. Where they're not, we can see that they will not perform well. So yeah, it's a definitely measurable factor. Yeah, 100%.
And you also mentioned that you guys are not just localized, you're a global scheme, aren't you? So if members are working abroad, would the CompEx qualifications be relevant there as well?
Yeah, they're recognised well abroad. I mean, if I take perhaps the UK perspective initially, I think about half our centres roughly in the UK, half of them are international. If you look at the recognition of the qualification, we do have a competitor. That's the IEC. But in my time as an IEC inspector looking at the Hazardous Area scheme, I only actually had one guy with one IEC qualification. I had to phone up the boss and say, what is this certificate I'm looking at here? Everyone else, hundreds of people, hold the CompEx suite of qualifications, which is well respected and has got a great provenance in the UK. Internationally, we have a similar arrangement. About half of our centres are international. They operate globally. We've also got different standards that we work to. So, for example, you take North America, we've got the NEC standards as opposed to the IEC standards. But yeah, it's quite a comprehensive suite of qualifications and with an international reach.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that. So, just putting all this together, then we've touched on a few different things, and we mentioned that COVID-19 taught us a few different things, and putting all your eggs in one basket isn't necessarily the best thing for a business to do. So diversifying, managing that risk, spreading out your type of work you're doing is always a good idea. Moving into things like a hazardous area doesn't necessarily mean working on an oil rig, doesn't necessarily mean working offshore. It can be a fuel forecourt, it can be a water treatment site, as you mentioned there, Peter. It can be a spray booth in a factory. These are all hazardous areas where I guarantee you our members will be going out and seeing that sort of work and just seeing a vapor-proof light in an area where it shouldn't be. That sort of thing is really quite common, isn't it? Training is available, and it's a big investment, but it can absolutely pay off without a shadow of a doubt. And hazardous area work is relevant to all trades, so be it fire alarm, electrical, security. It impacts all businesses, but it impacts their insurance and it impacts the reputation as well. You don't want to be that business that causes a problem or gets thrown off site. And it is a possible new revenue stream for any business. So there's the QR code if you want to take a scan of that. If you just hold your phone up, move it in and out 3 or 4 times, and eventually it'll pick it up, press the go to the page button, and it'll ask you a couple of questions about yourself and the presentation, and we'll send you a digital certificate that you can use. So we've got a couple of questions coming on the chat, I think. Oh, this one's for you, Peter. Is there any courses or any training you would recommend for the client to attend so as they get awareness, or I'm guessing a non-technical person?
Yeah. That's bang on. We have a qualification called a responsible person. In actual fact, we use the term responsible person because that is the old terminology, but the actual new title is a technical person with executive function, as you know, Gary. And it's not quite, it doesn't quite roll off the tongue in the same way. But the idea of it is that qualification is to enable the client to receive data from an inspection agency. So you go along, you look at their site, you fill out the inspection schedules, you have a look at, you mentioned about vapor-proof equipment in certain locations, you look at that, then you then present that information to them, and then it enables them to prioritize how they resolve those actions. So very much like electrical work, if something's going to give you an electric shock, well, that's a code 1, that's an immediately dangerous situation. So same with atmospheres where you've got the potential for explosion. Something that's going to create the likelihood of explosion is a major issue. It's got to be dealt with straight away. Whereas something that just doesn't comply, same for the electrical and the hazardous area, that can be derated and dealt with at a later time. So yes, that's the question. There is a qualification for customers. It's quite technical, it's quite involved, but it's a great qualification for health and safety manager of a company.
Brilliant, thank you for that one. For those listening, any other questions, if you drop them in the chat, either Peter, Claire or myself can try and help if we can. If not, then do please go on the ECA website, download the guide for hazardous areas. Do please get the eCOMPEX app. It's actually really good. Peter showed it to me a couple of months ago, and I did download it. I thought, oh, it'll be another app that sits there, but actually it's really quite good and useful. You mentioned you've got some taster training as well, Peter. Is that the leader stuff?
Yeah, Leader's the name for the platform. There's a number of individual training courses on there. Normally, if someone enrolls on a program, a study with CompEx, you would have the ability to interact with it and use it as a course preparation. And there's several hours. I mean, Claire would probably be able to. Here we are.
Hand up straight away there. Look at that, straight in.
I did. I was poised to answer that. Thank you, Peter. Yeah. So the CompEx Knowledge Hub, it has. It's free to sign up, and you don't have to actually have a CompEx certification to sign up. Anybody can actually sign up free of charge for it. So I think it'd be quite good perhaps if I share the direct link with Gary and Kat, so you can send that out in the follow-up. But at the moment, there's probably about 4.5 hours worth of free courses to do, which goes towards sort of CPD. You can get badges and certificates, but it is about sort of raising that sort of pre-course awareness. It is quite good for sort of lots of different levels, even sort of like your marketing, commercial type staff as well, administration staff. So that's definitely worth having a look at there. And then you can obviously then access different sort of library resources. There's also some pre-sample exam questions. And as Gary alluded to earlier, I think it's renowned that our qualifications are not that easy, but with some preparation and actually going on the right qualification does make a difference. And I think Peter might have mentioned it earlier, but one thing that we are currently sort of working on at the moment is an easier to understand sort of pathway journey for learners. So that will be sort of launched fairly soon. There is a little bit more information currently on the website, but it's trying to get the right people on the right courses. So actually this new pathway journey will actually really be helpful for sort of people at all levels to make sure that they are on the right course. So whether it's starting foundation plus and then working up, but hopefully that will be sort of all self-explanatory in terms of where you are on your complex journey.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say the foundation course is a really good day. I think it's the 2-day tester
it's a
qualification.
2-day. Yeah, we are also sort of just piloting at the moment an EX awareness course. So that's a sort of watch this space in terms of when that's launched as well. And I think one thing that we've sort of had a lot of sort of evidence from sort of our stakeholder meetings, for example, is raising the awareness amongst leadership as well, and exec level. So sort of levels know, oh, you need complex training, etc. But actually sort of in the boardroom, it's sort of, well, that's expensive and that's quite a long time and things, and sort of how actually we can sort of raise that awareness at the sort of top down. So we're sort of working on a piece of work at the moment, which hopefully will help companies to understand that. And just Peter, I think Peter Kerry, a question. So the qualifications last for 5 years, and then you would then need to recertify at the end of the 5-year period.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for picking that one up, Claire. I was just about to ask you on that one. How long do the qualifications last? So, yeah, spot on. There he is. No problem. So I think from our side, it's a case of this is a great opportunity for you guys. It is an awareness piece for you. If you're walking into environments where there's potentially hazardous areas that you're not suitably trained or skilled or competent on, stop. You won't be covered by insurance. There will be problems later on if you get the wrong equipment. It will likely go badly wrong. But do take that as an opportunity rather than as a problem. Go away and speak to our friends at CompEx. Get the right training, get the right competence, go back and speak to your client and say, look, this was a problem. I can now fix it for you. Add those additional strings to your bow and develop your business and develop it in a way that is both interesting and hopefully very profitable. If that's the end, look at that. Well, I said it would be about 45 minutes with Q&As, but we've done it bang on 45 minutes, unless there's any other questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch with ECA, technical@eca.co.uk is our email address. Drop us a line. What's the best way to get in touch with CompEx?
If you send it to info@compex-cert.com.
CompEx.
I'll pop it in the chat, actually.
Yeah, stick it in the chat, and then if our members are interested, they can reach out to you guys and get some information. If you would like some info from ECA, as I say, get in touch with us. Speak to your regional manager. We can pass that all on. Otherwise, hopefully the sun is still shining where you all are, and you can all go and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for joining us, and if you do have any questions, do please reach out and we'll try our best to help. Otherwise, thanks ever so much and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks all.
Cheers, Peter. Cheers, Claire.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.